Mr. Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Chairman of founding chairman of our Conselho de Diáspora, Mr. Director, President of the Executive Direction of our Conselho de Diáspora, ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a little different, this sensation to be here at the same time with some of you present and others that can follow through video. But I will do my best to address two issues that I think are of the utmost importance when we speak about Europe and Africa, because that's what our summit, our forum is about, European-African relations. I will start by a very general presentation of the current moment I see in the European Union-African relations. And then, also because, as you may know, I'm now chairman of Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines, I think I should share with you some of my concerns and also objectives in terms of the deployment of vaccines in the world, especially in Africa and in the low-income economies. Because this is, of course, critically important, not only from a humanitarian, a health point of view, but also from an economic, and I would say also from a geopolitical point of view. So, two parts. The first, very general, on European Union-Africa relations. Second, on the response that has been given now to the pandemic, namely through the organization I have now the honor to serve, Gavi and COVAX, which is the international facility to fight this pandemic. Now, of course, European Union-African relations, we always ask why is there something special? Of course there is something special. We are neighbors, there is cultural and historical proximity, we are natural partners. This was now extremely evident in the very interesting conversation held by the President of Portugal, Professor Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, and the President of Angola, João Lourenço. It was extremely clear, this level of complicity that I think should mark the relations in general between Africa and Europe. European Union is Africa's biggest trading, investment, and development partner. Not always people have this notion, because very frequently the statistics, the world statistics appear by country. And so, of course, if you just look at Germany or France or Italy or Spain or Portugal, of course, we are not the main partners of Africa, but together as European Union, we still are the most important economic partner of all the African continent, in terms of trade and in terms of investment. Our political, economic, and security interests are intertwined. Recoveries from COVID, too. The economic downturn in Europe has immediately direct repercussions in the other side of the Mediterranean. And we also know from experience that instability in the other side, from Libya, Sahel, or the Horn of Africa, directly impacts us in Europe from the point of view of security or illegal migration or refugees. So this relationship is also key for global challenges, because Africa will make or break the green and digital transitions. Demographic explosion in Africa, 1.3 billion today. We expect 2.5 billion Africans in 2050. So in fact, without Africa, it's impossible to be successful in the green transition and in the digital transition that very rightly the European Union has put as its priorities. And we have also something good upon which we can build, is a shared view or outlook of the world in terms of multilateralism. Both Africans and Europeans broadly support a multilateral approach, not a unilateral or just one or two countries leading the world. We believe in multilateralism, and I think that's the way it should be. Now, how can we make progress on this? Now the European Union, I'm no longer speaking, of course, officially on behalf of the European Union, but I have to tell you that I remain extremely committed to the European, and so I know, of course, the priorities of the European Union. Just last Friday, precisely 1 week ago, I met my successor, Ursula von der Leyen, the current president of the European Commission, and we had the opportunity to speak about Africa in the context of the fight against the global pandemic. And the European Union has its objective now to make a real jump forward in the next African Union-European Union summit that should take place in early 2022. As you know, last one was in 2017 in Abidjan, but because of COVID, there have been several postponements. Leaders on both sides are expecting the first half of 2022 to be the moment for this summit that could seal a new Africa-EU partnership. The European Union has released a proposal for a new strategy in March 2020 with several priority areas: green transition and energy access, digital transformation, growth and jobs, peace and governance, migration and mobility. And the European Council conclusions of October call for deepening and renewing our partnership with Africa. The idea of the European Union is to position itself as a privileged partner for the continent and to improve all aspects of sustainability and reliability in that relationship. The idea is also to break with the donor-recipient approach straitjacket. There is, of course, aid for development, but it should not be the center or the main perspective. We should build on the Africa Protocol of post-Cotonou Agreement. And it's also a holistic approach. Dialogue is not and should not be only between the European Union on one side and the African Union on the other side. It also covers regional players, different regional organizations, the private sector, civil society, youth representatives. What we have been doing here in this Euro-African Forum is part also of this Euro-Africa new perspective. And of course, we should try to leverage the relationship and the partnership at multilateral level. Now, on what fields? The continent, African continent, is facing its first economic recession in 25 years. Africa has been very much impacted by this COVID. Sub-Saharan Africa economy contracted by almost 2 percentage points of GDP in 2020. And it is now growing slower than other parts of the world. So Africa, that in spite of all its difficulties was growing continuously for decades, now has in fact had a difficult and is facing an extremely difficult challenge. That was a dramatic economic fallout. And COVID is also a stress test for the European Union and African Union partnership. This has magnified inequalities, vulnerabilities, and gaps. When a friend goes through tough times, you should help. That's why we have and should have as immediate priorities not only vaccine solidarity, debt relief, and economic recovery. That's why the European Union hopes to leverage the initiative called Global Recovery, the Global Recovery Initiative, to incentivize green and digital transitions. That's an opportunity also to have Africa as partner in this endeavor. And we'll offer, the European Union will offer in that summit a 2021-2027 programming, a transformational team Europe initiatives. When I say Team Europe, of course, you know, I mean European institutions, namely the European Commission, but also the member states. So it's not just the European Union, it's European Union and its member states. And we are looking at several ideas, from helping vaccine manufacturing, young African businesses, comprehensive investment package, and support to the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. These are some of the ideas that are now being discussed, and I hope that the next African Union, European Union Summit will indeed make progress on this area. But I've told you I'd like to share with you my opinion how we are fighting this global pandemic, and also with the European and African dimension. COVAX, the facility that was created by Gavi, but also CEPI and World Health Organization to fight this pandemic, is now working at scale, having delivered over 389 million doses to 144 countries so far, including over 123 million doses to 52 countries in Africa. Working in partnership with the African Union, I have a regular dialogue with the President of the African Union. The current President is the President of DRC, Tshisekedi. Working also with AVAT and other regional partners, we are fighting to secure more doses for the region and addressing inequity by calling on industry and high-income countries to take urgent steps to prioritize supply to COVAX, both through our own supply agreements and via donations. We know that many of the world's richest nations have surpluses of vaccine doses. Let's be frank, there were countries that had 5 times more doses than what they needed. That's why we have been asking them to share, and I can say that there has been now a good response to that. We have started seeing them sharing doses via COVAX, and that is extremely welcome. European Union, for instance, have already pledged over 500 million doses of donations. We have already delivered 147 million doses donated by higher income countries. To be more effective, these donations need to be faster, larger volumes, and more predictable to make them less of a logistical big effort to allocate and deliver these to countries able to absorb them. So to be once again very frank with you, sometimes what happened was that some of the rich countries that have excess vaccines, they were telling us, look, you can take them now, but very close to the expiry date. Of course, that's a difficulty. And that's a difficulty because not only for us to program, but for the countries that have to receive. And there are huge logistical challenges in this process. So the reality is that we have still, I would say, shameful inequity in the world. And I'm measuring my words. While we can say, grosso modo, that around 70% of the developed world is already vaccinated, Africa, the last figures I have, they are from 2 days ago, with 1 dose, 8% of the Africans eligible for vaccination are vaccinated, 8%. And fully vaccinated, 5.2%. So this compares to 70% in the developed world, 75% on average in the European Union. COVAX has delivered already to Africa 115 million doses. From those, 87 million went to sub-Saharan Africa, and 28 million went to the so-called Saharan, so Northern Africa, including the Sahara region. So you see, this is very far from where we should be. We had terrible situations, namely in July, August, where we had money, but we simply did not have doses. We had money because, by the way, there were very successful pledging conferences. And I want once again to thank the big donors like the United States of America or the European Union, Japan, many others. In fact, I organized together with Antony Blinken, Secretary of State of the United States, the launching event of that pledging conference. And then the pledging conference itself, it was co-hosted by the Prime Minister of Japan and myself. And in fact, we've got more money than what we were requesting. But we had no doses. And why? We had no doses. I already said partly because some countries accumulated too many, because there were problems of supply, there were problems of producing at scale, and also because there were export restrictions, and some of these export restrictions are still there. I understand partly the problem. I mean, India, that is one of the most important suppliers of vaccines in the world, and has been an extremely reliable partner of Gavi for many years. It's one of the biggest, if not, it was the biggest producer of vaccines in the world. But when India was affected itself by the pandemic, it gave priority to its own population, and it suspended exports still suspended now. Apparently, they are going to resume very soon, but not yet. And a big part of our portfolio was precisely of vaccines manufactured in India. And other countries have kept also exports either to the final vaccine or to some products, raw materials for making the vaccine. This was the reason why there were those delays. So we also believe that we have to look at this in the future, but based on the data we have for the present. I was just checking today exactly how the different countries performed in Africa. And it's interesting to see that those that have been more successful are small island states and also some countries of North of Africa. So in fact, the countries that got more vaccines and that were going faster and more ambitious in terms of vaccinated population are Seychelles, Mauritius, Morocco, Cabo Verde, Tunisia, and São Tomé and Príncipe. These are the countries that until now, in percentage, of course, it's more difficult to vaccinate a country like Angola than a country like São Tomé and Príncipe for its huge dimension. But these are the statistics. So if you just count sub-Saharan Africa countries, in fact, we can say it's Seychelles, the #1, Mauritius, #2, Cabo Verde, #3, São Tomé and Príncipe, #4. And Angola, in spite of its huge dimension, was the #4, or is #14 in terms of the number of people effectively vaccinated. And some of these countries have huge logistical problems. One of the more typical logistical problems for some type of vaccines, we need -80 degrees Celsius, and they simply had no cold chain to keep the vaccines and to distribute them. But besides other legal and more concrete points that I'm not going to discuss now because of time. Another point we have to consider, of course, for the future is supporting immunization through building concrete capacity in Africa. It will take time. It needs dedicated financing, resources, and political will. We in Gavi COVAX, we commend the efforts that have been taken so far and encourage initiatives that contribute to a more diversified global supplier base while building local manufacturing capacity. For instance, the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing initiative that was launched by African Union in summer to build a continental framework for production in Africa is welcome and will contribute to a diversified global supplier base to improve supply security. Vaccine manufacturing is a biological process and can be unpredictable, meaning that multiple suppliers in any given category can buffer unexpected shortfalls from any individual manufacturer. Healthy competition across a diversified supplier base is also important to keep pricing affordable. And we have seen with COVID-19 vaccine nationalism that this strategy of diversification is even more important now. I had the occasion, precisely in my last visit to Brussels, to congratulate Ursula von der Leyen and the European Commission for their €1 billion initiative on manufacturing and access to vaccines, medicines, and health technology in Africa. They have announced in the G20 Global Health Summit, a global health summit that was organized virtually, jointly by the European Commission and by the current presidency of G20, the Italian presidency, Mario Draghi. I also had the honor to participate in that summit. And in fact, that announcement made by the European Commission created some dynamic. And now work is already advanced in Senegal, where Team Europe is supporting Senegal's ambition to become a regional hub for vaccines production. Team Europe is also working in Rwanda, I spoke also with President Kagame recently, to enhance its manufacturing capacities and strengthens regulatory frameworks, and funding is now being mobilized for South Africa. We are also very delighted to see an agreement reached by Pfizer, BioNTech, and South Africa's BioVac Institute to manufacture around 100 million doses a year of COVID-19 vaccines for use by the African Union, as well as the advanced discussions between Senegal, Rwanda, and BioNTech on future vaccines production. The cooperation between the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control and the African one, that is also a tangible example of what partnership can mean in practice. So these are good signals, but it will take time to have this capacity really effective and delivering in Africa. Now, in regard to doses reaching the continent, we are already seeing supply ticking upwards, with 34 million doses delivered to Africa alone since the beginning of October. We'll see a supply increase significantly through these months of October, November, and December. We know that we can meet our goal of reaching at-risk and frontline populations by the end of the year if donor countries and manufacturers keep their promises. This will require, namely, manufacturers to make their supply schedules transparent, countries that have excess doses to swap their place in the production queue, and countries with excess doses to expand, accelerate, and systematize those donations. And this is the way. And if we do this, we will reach those goals. COVAX is certainly a crucial part of global response. In fact, it is the only one at multilateral level. There are national efforts. I mean, the European Union was, let's say it frankly, very successful. You remember at that moment it was controversial if it should be the European Commission buying the vaccines on behalf of all the member states. I heard many people criticizing that. The reality is that today the European Union is among, if not the highest globally in terms of vaccination. So, but multilaterally, globally, there is only one game in town, and it is COVAX, of course supported by the WHO and with the full support of the United Nations. So, in 86 lower-income countries, COVAX has supplied near 30% of all doses delivered, a figure that, when you go to Africa, means 50%. So 50% of what Africa has received outside comes through COVAX. That brings with it, of course, additional challenges. As we supply increasingly large number of doses, countries need to be prepared to roll out this greater quantity of vaccines. That's why we have been working across COVAX to provide governments in Africa and around the world with the support they need. Through the concerted efforts of ministries, COVAX partners, other stakeholders, we have already been able to increase absorptive capacity to match supply in a majority of countries. However, there is still an urgent need to increase and coordinate resources that are dedicated to country delivery, including this expansion of absorptive capacity. So, what is going to happen now is a little bit different from what happened in the beginning. In the beginning, you have many demand, not sufficient supply. I believe you are going to have, beginning of next year, sufficient supply, even probably excessive supply. The issue is the capacity of using those vaccines, besides, of course, the issue of vaccine hesitancy that we already mentioned. The last meeting of the board of Gavi approved $799 million to be distributed rapidly and on an accelerated timeline to meet these urgent vaccine rollout-related needs. This includes, for example, rolling out ultra-cold chain infrastructure. And over the last few months, we have seen the largest rollout of ultra-cold chain in history, with hundreds of units to 47 countries that were deployed in less than 5 months. So accelerating vaccination coverage in lower-income countries is our best chance to end the acute stage of the pandemic. Because if the pandemic continues anywhere, it will continue to be a threat everywhere. And this is a message I'd like to convey very strongly, because I fear there is some complacency in some quarters, including, by the way, in the most developed countries, that we are getting over this. We are not yet out of the pandemic, I'm sorry to say. And that's why we need to avoid any form of complacency. And the best way is to vaccinate the world at large. Along with giving the governments the tools they need to roll out more vaccines, we need to fight what has been called the infodemic, the plague of disinformation that could threaten vaccine take-up. Vaccine hesitancy is a challenge we face not just in Africa, but around the world. While factors can be very different, one common denominator is the lack of access to high-quality information. We know there is a lot of misinformation shared by family, friends, sometimes politicians, religious leaders, and even doctors. So community-level action forms a critical part of our response. COVAX on-the-ground partners, including governments and UNICEF, that is doing a great job, work closely with local and religious leaders, as well as community mobilizers, to engage communities and provide them with the necessary communication tools to help respond to any questions and concerns about vaccines that they may get asked. Gavi's civil society constituency is also actively supporting this community-level engagement. But COVID-19 is not the only challenge, as was said recently in that conversation between President Marcelo Rebelo and President João Lourenço. There are other diseases. And there is in Africa the issue of core immunization, the program that Gavi for more than 20 years has been vaccinating children in the less developed countries, namely in Africa. Childhood vaccination does not just save lives, it also means people live longer, healthier, and with more productive lives, with an estimated $54 in broader societal benefits for every dollar spent on vaccination. So between 2000 and 2020, Gavi, whose first chairman of the board was Nelson Mandela, so with a clear focus on Africa, Gavi has helped vaccinate more than 888 million children in 77 countries through routine immunization and supported more than 1.1 billion campaign vaccinations. For Africa, this means we have reached more than 364 million children in Africa with life-saving vaccines, preventing more than 8.9 million deaths. Together, we are expanding the reach of vaccines, protecting people against killers like pneumonia, diarrhea, meningitis, HPV, and Ebola. So this COVID pandemic, besides the direct impact it has in health, is also provoking some delays in this routine immunization. To be frank, the delays in routine immunization were not so important as delays fighting other diseases. Why? Because, in fact, we are using the networks of vaccination. Anyhow, we have to recover these delays because it's critically important. So, in line with the so-called Gavi 5.0 strategy and its overarching objective of leaving no one behind, Gavi will aim to reduce the number of zero-dose children globally by 25% in the period from now until 2025. If we can continue to catch up on missed vaccinations through COVID-19 and reach these zero-dose children, we call those children that, because they are in very remote areas, because they are very poor, because I mean, they are sometimes in the most catastrophic circumstances, they had not a single vaccine. While in some countries, even countries that have a compulsory vaccine for those children, there are parts of the country that are not reached. So our goal as Gavi is to reach the unreachable so that we can protect these communities for further deaths. In Africa, this accounts for more than 8 million children who do not receive any routine vaccination and often coming from households that are surviving with less than $1.9 a day, so less than $2 a day. And these families are living on that basis. So the role here of many others is very important. I'm not going into detail, from the civil society to the private sector. We have been cooperating with the private sector, by the way. It's interesting to see, for instance, a company like a Zipline helping the delivery in very remote parts of Africa through drones. Drones are used to distribute vaccines. For instance, I saw it in Senegal. And I think, to conclude this part, that we should highlight a very positive development. The positive development is that now the WHO has recognized as credible a vaccine against malaria. So the so-called RTS vaccine. Africa continues to bear the heaviest malaria burden, and African children are at highest risk of dying of malaria. More than 260,000 African children under the age of 5 die from malaria annually. So now, the addition of malaria vaccine to currently recommended malaria control interventions could save tens of thousands of lives annually and drive down child mortality in Africa. The tests seem to confirm this, and I'm looking forward to the board meeting of Gavi in December, where we'll take a decision about including or not this vaccine in our portfolio for vaccine routine immunization. To conclude, for the future, because we have this pandemic, there is one thing that is sure: we are going to have more pandemics. It is evolutionary certain. And let's be honest with ourselves. Generally speaking, governments were not prepared. Even the most powerful, the richest countries in the world were not prepared. The United States has more than 700,000 casualties. I mean, we are speaking about, globally, more than 5 million official deaths. So, in fact, politics has failed. Afterwards, there was a lot of effort, improvisation, but we are not prepared. So that's why now there is an effort. And for instance, that's the reason why I also met President Draghi recently in Rome, because he is sharing the G20. And the G20 is now preparing some ideas to have a kind of a permanent structure to be ready for pandemics. In fact, it is drawing inspiration from what happened in the financial crisis. When we had the financial crisis, 2007, 2008, we were also not prepared. And probably some of you remember, there was a financial stability forum, but without any competencies. That's when we transformed it in the Financial Stability Board. In fact, it was a European initiative. When President Sarkozy, that was the then rotating president of the European Union, and myself, we went to ask President George W. Bush, it was last months of President George W. Bush in power, to call a G20 summit. Because until then, we had only G8 summits, not G20 summits. And we said to him, look, it's not enough. We need to bring the world with us. We need China, we need India, we need Brazil, we need all other economies that are so important for that. And then we created some mechanisms that in fact were at least avoiding return to protectionism and giving some credibility to the global community effort to fight the financial crisis that, of course, in Europe, with the sovereign debt crisis, had a still more difficult expression. Now, let me once again be very honest and frank with you. I don't understand why the G20 has not yet done something comparable. It should do. And so it's now, the end of this month, in Rome, that they are preparing some decisions to have a kind of a permanent, not create a new institution, but a permanent body, namely based on the finance ministers and health ministers, and also a permanent fund, so that we are ready for the next pandemic. This will be critically important. At the same time, I believe it should be avoided the idea of creating new bureaucracies. We have an organization globally, it's the World Health Organization, with the legitimacy of being the United Nations organization. And of course, if there are issues where it can be improved, let's improve it, but not to create every time new institutions. But let's also keep the flexibility of COVAX when it comes to vaccines, because it's one of the pillars of the response, because to fight a pandemic, we need diagnostics, we need therapeutics, and we need vaccines. For the vaccine part, COVAX has already shown it can deliver. So we should have a flexible solution, but based on a permanent preparedness of the global community to fight this pandemic. I hope these will be the lessons learned from this pandemic. That not only now the countries understand that health is a priority. It's a priority not only, of course, because of the well-being of our citizens, but also in terms of global security. Because destruction of economies, the disruptions, the frictions, geopolitical frictions, are aggravated also by this kind of pandemic. And I could even go further and say this pandemic has shown the possibility of the weaponization of infectious diseases. Can you imagine if now infectious diseases are weaponized either by malignant states or by non-state actors? So we are speaking of something that is existential, the response to pandemics. It's about health, it's about economy, it's about social conditions, but it's also about global security. And that's why, if it's not now, when? When will the global community react if not now? That's why I believe we should continue to invest more forcefully in health resilience, and that should be a global public good. We all know that the world is going through a difficult period. We know that there are geopolitical serious frictions, but I believe it's possible. When it comes to global public goods like public health, or, for instance, the fight against climate change, that different governments put aside their ideological or their political serious divergences and work together for that global public good. That's what we are trying to do at our level with COVAX. That's why we hope also that we can achieve better results with the low-income countries, and we believe that the European Union can and should continue to do whatever it may do to help Africa and other parts of the world. I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.